Hello everyone and welcome back to Fly From Home. It's Kitty back again here with another Microsoft Flight Simulator add-on aircraft product review. And the subject of this video is going to be, strangely enough, the thing you see right in front of you on the screen. It's the Carenado T182T Turbo Skylane. That was released quite a while ago, actually. It was actually released, for most people, I believe, pretty much on the day the simulator came out. So you might be wondering, oh, why are you choosing to do this thing? It's been out ages. Well, Carenado have been nice enough to actually give us this for free to take a look at. So I think I more than owe it to them to do a video and see what it's like. That said, the video is not sponsored or anything like that, so don't worry, I'm not being handed bungfuls of cash to talk this thing up. I'm going to do my usual objective review from the point of view of a real-world professional commercial flying instructor. So I'll be doing the usual, looking at all the books and the figures of the real aircraft and comparing it to how this thing flies and performs in the simulator. So, to start off with, we'll have a look at the exterior parts of the aeroplane, then the interior, and then we'll get into the sim and actually give it a fly round. Just as a little bit of background to the aircraft before we start getting into things, the Cessna 182 has been around since 1956, so it's a fair old design. It's still in production today. There have been loads and loads of different variants of this thing produced over the years. There's only one in production at the moment, which is the 182T, which is basically this version without the turbocharged engine. This particular version was first produced in 2001, and it's, like I said, basically it's the 182T, which is the most modern variant of the Cessna 182. With a turbocharged 235 horsepower 6-cylinder Lycoming piston engine. One more little nugget of info, I guess, before we get into things. It's actually the second most produced aircraft in history, just behind the its smaller cousin, the Cessna 170. So there are a lot of these things knocking around. You don't actually see a huge number of them in the UK, to be fair. The 172 is very popular. The 152 is very, very popular as well, certainly with flying clubs. But the 182, a little bit rarer, I'd say. Probably a bit more popular over in the States. This aircraft with a turbocharger. Now, a lot of people think, oh, turbocharger, surely it's gonna make the plane fast, isn't it? Like a turbocharged car is generally faster than a normally aspirated version of the same car, right? In aircraft, it works kind of differently. Turbochargers are actually fitted to aircraft engines in order to improve performance at higher altitude. So essentially what happens is the aircraft climbs and the air density becomes less with altitude. The turbocharger compresses the air coming into the engine to essentially keep the pressure the same as if you were at sea level. So the turbocharger just, it doesn't add performance to the engine, it just keeps the engine breathing properly the higher you go. So essentially it gives you sea level rated horsepower all the way up to an altitude. This aircraft, its service ceiling, I believe, is 20,000 feet, which is really quite impressive. It's actually more than the DA-42, which is a twin-engined turbocharged aircraft with much more modern engines. So I find that quite impressive. Other than that, the performance is relatively similar to the Piper Arrow. Obviously, you've got fixed gear, high wing with struts. It's a lot more draggy than the Arrow, which is low wing and retractable gear. So at lower altitude, the performance isn't quite as good, and the fuel burn is certainly more. But if you can get this thing nice and high, then it really does start to make sense. Now, one of the reasons why you don't often see aircraft like this, certainly in the UK, probably throughout Northern Europe, is that it doesn't really make a huge amount of sense. Like I said, the turbocharger is designed for better performance at high altitude. At high altitude, you're generally going to encounter icing conditions, and this aircraft doesn't have any kind of anti-icing or de-icing systems fitted, apart from a piso heater. So it's a bit like if you watch my review of the Carenado Seminole, it's a kind of similar situation to that, really. It's an aircraft which is capable of going high into the airways, operating IFR. However, it's not equipped with anti-icing equipment, which means most of the time you aren't able to get that high because you would encounter clouds, which would then start adding ice to the airframe. So you've got to actively avoid those things, which you just can't do if you're flying in an airway. You can't be constantly dodging around clouds visually to try and maintain inside clear air. So yeah, not a huge amount of use over in the UK. Certainly over in the US, for you guys who live certainly in the south of the US, these aeroplanes probably a lot more common because you guys have got much nicer weather down there, and you can probably get up to 15, 16, 20,000 feet even without having to fly into cloud. Another situation where you may benefit from a turbocharged aircraft is operating out of high altitude airstrips. So something down in South America, very, very high base altitude, very high density altitude. The turbocharger helps with that as well. But anyway, I'll shut up rambling on about the real aircraft, and we'll have a look at this thing in the sim. Now, you can probably see from the hangar view here, and we'll have a look at it in the sim as well in a second, that the external model of this aeroplane is extremely good. We'll just have a little look. Something you've probably noticed if you've watched the Carenado videos, the other two Carenado aircraft that we've reviewed on this channel, the Mooney and the Seminole, is that their external models are unbelievably good. Very, very high quality, lovely, shiny, reflective textures, depicting an aeroplane which is either very, very well looked after or pretty much brand new, because there's little or no weathering on this aircraft. So if you're into your sort of weathered up look, then this is not the airplane for you. But they've obviously put in a lot of effort into the way it looks, because it does look absolutely fantastic. We've got a few different liveries available, all of them presumably based on real aircraft. We've got this one here, which is obviously G registered in the UK. A couple of the other three are all US registered, November registered aircraft. Once it's decided to load, we'll have a look at this one. So this is a November registered aircraft in blue and gold. Looks good. This one is in a very fetching shade of beige. Hearing aid beige, I think we'd call it in the UK. With a bit of dark blue and silver in there as well, or grey. And finally this one, which is, again, red and silver like the first one, but slightly different pattern. Lovely sort of swooshy lines over it. Very attractive indeed. Right, let's have a quick look inside the aircraft. You'll notice straight away that we have a glass cockpit fitted to this airplane. It's the Garmin G1000, which you'll find on a good number of the default Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft. This is the default setup, by the way. This isn't a custom G1000 fit. It doesn't have any more functionality than the default one was, but the default one does, sorry. However, as the default one improves, this one will improve with it. But as you probably know, as of the filming of this video, there's quite a lot of limitations to the default instrumentation in this simulator. So you certainly don't get all of the features which you get on the real G1000, which I would say is a little bit of a drawback at the moment. Very, very nicely modeled cockpit, though. We'll not get too deep into the instruments just yet. You can see just the textures on this sort of rough, light plastic stuff on the doors. I can almost feel that in my mind just looking at it. it's kind of fitted to all light aircraft, really. It seems to find its way into everything. Very, very nice, and you can see the textures on the seats, the stitching, and the sort of perforated leather on the seats. Lovely looking seats, these things. A lot nicer than most aircraft I fly. And the back seats there. One of the advantages of a Cessna is you've got a nice big back window, and you can just see the quality of these things. Even if I zoom into the sort of, you can see the little placard on the back there. It's quite easily readable, which is very impressive indeed. Little pockets on the seats and the carpet and everything. So yeah, very, very nice. Top marks for the quality of the external model and the quality of the internal model as well. Okay, so here we are into the simulator now. Just a quick note on the weather conditions and everything. I've got the aircraft set up in the default clear skies weather, which is basically ISA standard atmosphere, 15 degrees at sea level, 2 degrees per 1,000 feet, decrease in temperature. 1013 hectopascals pressure on the deck, so that's 29902 for all our American friends. So everything is all default, and that is to help us with our performance calculations. We're also on the ground at Doncaster, so we're going to do our default Doncaster to Nottingham flight, just because I like to do that one, because it just keeps things fair over all the aircraft we test on this channel. Right, so let's have a quick look at the aeroplane, what it looks like with real lighting. Now we're out of the hangar, and it's sort of funny partial lighting. So as you can see, it looks very, very nice. Those rivets on the tail do seem to stand out maybe a little bit more than perhaps they should, but other than that, it does look lovely. You can see I've got all the ground handling elements in place here. We've got a nice little GPU hooked up. We've got I don't know, what can you call those things? Blanking plugs, I guess. Plugs? Yeah, engine plugs. I guess that's what they're called on big aeroplanes. In the intakes here, engine air intake and cooling intakes. And I've also got the pitot cover on there. And some little cones. And a really, really beefy looking tow bar. I mean, that's way better than the ones that I'm used to. The ones that I'm used to are usually just a stick. A metal stick, which hooks onto the nose wheel that you then have to get try and grab hold of some mates and manhandle the aeroplane around by tugging on the spars or the prop or whatever. But I guess in the world of Microsoft Flight Simulator, things are a little more civilized, which is awfully nice. It's good to dream, isn't it? Right, so here we are in the cockpit. This is the cockpit with the in-sim lighting. Very, very nice indeed. One thing I'm going to show you that I noticed a second ago, if we pop outside, even though the screens are off in the aircraft, outside, it looks like we're staring into hell on the two primary displays. Now, I don't know if that's a Microsoft Flight Simulator bug or a Carenado bug, but that does let the side down somewhat, especially when all the other stuff on the interior is very nicely modelled. For example, if I pop down the sunscreen there, you can actually see the sunscreen has moved on the outside as well. So yeah, slightly a little bit of a negative there, I guess, with those red things. Hopefully they'll fix that. It's quite a simple little bug, I'm sure. Aircraft configuration, by the way, that we've got full fuel and full baggage. So we got max all-up weight of 3,100 pounds. And that is because the performance figures in the pilot's operating handbook of this aircraft are all calibrated for an aircraft weight of 3,100 pounds. So I wanted to keep it as close to the book ideal as possible in terms of atmospheric conditions and in terms of aircraft configuration, so we can get as fair a representation as possible, and we can compare it to the book figures as much as we can. And I'll bring those up on screen when we talk about those a little bit later. As you can see, we've got the standard Carenado little iPad control thing, which can be disappeared and brought back up again. What this does is control all of the visual elements here, including the doors and the baggage compartment. And it also allows you to set a cockpit state. So if you accidentally load it in with everything turned on, you can switch it to cold and dark or ready for taxi or whatever. So it's a little bit of a shortcut there, which is always nice to have. So let's pop off the static elements and the external power and the tow bar. and we'll put our pilot and co-pilot in the aircraft, shut all the doors, and get rid of the iPad. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the real aircraft's checklist to start the aircraft, and we'll see how closely it performs to the real thing. So, the before starting engine checklist, pre-flight inspection, we'll assume that we've done our walk around. Passenger briefing not required. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the aircraft. Seats and belts are just unlocked. That's fine. We're all strapped in. Brakes tested and set, so we can give the toe brakes a bit of a poke. Make sure we've got some pressure in those and make sure our parking brake is pulled out and set, which is this lever here. Circuit breakers, we'll check all the circuit breakers are in. They're very helpfully underneath the yoke, so you'll have to disappear the yoke to have a look at those, but that's fine. Electrical equipment is all off, so master and avionics off. All the... turn that down, I guess. Or is that avionics? Is that going to be the screens? I'll leave it in the middle. All the other aircraft lights are off, so all the electrics are off. Avionics, yeah, bus 1 and 2 are off. And there's a caution here that says the avionics switch has to be off for engine start to avoid possible damage to the avionics. So that's something quite important, I guess. Cowl flaps, so this aircraft does have a cowl flap system, so we'll pop those open using that lever there, and we can have a look outside. The cowl flaps are here, underneath the engine cowling here. So you can see those have now come down. And fuel selector valve on both. So this is something, as a mostly Piper pilot, is a bit of a luxury, really. It actually draws fuel from both tanks at the same time, which is an advantage of the high wing. This is something that Cessnas almost all have, the high wing ones anyway. And it just makes fuel management a lot more simple. However, it does make refueling the aeroplane when it's on a bit of a slant a bit awkward. So hence why you have selectors here. And also, obviously, if you had a leak in one tank or the other, you could isolate and just draw fuel from one side. Or indeed, draw fuel from the tank which is leaking, so you can drain it as fast as possible and use as much of it as you can. Interestingly, one thing you aren't going to see on this airplane is an alternate air door. Now, normally with a fuel-injected aircraft, you have an alternate air door to guard against the possibility of your air intake becoming blocked with ice, or the filter becoming soggy with water, or anything like that. Stuff getting stuck in it on the ground or something like that. The alternate air door in this aircraft is actually automatic. It's a spring-loaded door in the cowling, which opens automatically if the intake pressure or the intake becomes blocked. The pressure of the engine trying to draw air automatically pulls the spring-loaded intake door open, which is very clever. Means we've got one less thing to test on the ground and keep checking in flight. So we'll get on with our checklist. So throttle control 1/4 inch, so I'll crack the throttle. As you can see, my joystick's just messed around with all the mixture and everything, but we'll crack the throttle open just slightly there. Propeller control high RPMs, that's the blue plunger there all the way forwards. Mixer control idle cutoff, it's all the way out here. Standby battery switch, so this is one of the slightly strange things about this airplane. You don't actually start it on the primary battery, you start it on the standby. So we move it to the test position to start off with, and you can see the little green light comes on there. And then we switch it to the arm position. And we can see that the standby battery is now powering the aircraft's primary avionics, which is obviously the PFD here. So we're getting a bunch of cautions. I'll just cancel that. And everything's loaded up now. As you can see, the terrain alert warning system is going through its bit test. Everything's lined up. Looks good. Oil pressure flashing, obviously, because the engine's not started. All these things in red are to do with the engine being stopped. So, we've checked the engine parameters. There are no red X's, which means sensor's not reading anything. Check the bus volts, and there should be 24 volts across the bus, which we've got here, so that's good. M bus volts, check 1.5 volts or less. So I'm guessing 0 volts is okay. It is less than 1.5. I don't know. I've never flown one of these aircraft with this equipment fit before in real life, so I don't know if that's a normal indication or not. If anyone has, let me know. Battery S amps check, verified discharge shown. So ammeter there, so we can see -5, so it's discharging. That's because we're running the aircraft on battery, and it is running down, so we better hurry up before it goes flat. Standby battery annunciator check, annunciator is shown, so yes, we do have standby battery in yellow here. Check the propeller is clear all around, none of our little virtual ground crew are going to get minced. I guess we pop the beacon light on, which tells the ground crew that we are going to start. And we also put the master battery on at this point, so the main battery now comes on, which causes the PFD to reload itself. There we go. So we can see now M volts, it's now 24.4 and -6 on there. So I guess M is for the main, and this is the E is for the standby battery, or the emergency battery, I guess. It's the way that that works. Beacon light is on. Okay, so let's pop the fuel pump on, which is extremely loud. And then we're going to go full rate. So this is the priming process. So we'll be looking at the fuel flow there. So it's gone up. We'll leave it about 4 seconds and then idle it off again. Fuel pump back off again. And then we're starting the engine. Now, if you've watched my Arrow videos, you'll know that to start a fuel-injected aircraft, you crank the starter, the engine fires up, and then you put the fuel in. That currently isn't working in Microsoft Flight Simulator, so I'll crank the starter, and then I'm just going to shove the fuel flow forward, and then the engine will start. It's just, unfortunately, what we have to deal with at the moment. So I'm going to use the mag switch on my honeycomb yoke, so you can see the mags are down there. So I'm going to go to both. Then I'm going to start, and then I'm going to push the mixture control forward with a control on my joystick. Okay, so oil pressure is rising. Volts and amps are all green. We've got no fire. We've got no starter warning light indication. So we are good on the start front. I'll just pick the RPM up to 1200. Should give us a comfy ground idle there. And after start checks, yeah, oil pressure is in the green. Volts and amps for the battery are good. Nav lights on, so I'll flick that on now. The nav light switch is actually underneath the yoke, but I've got it bound to my, no, not that one, honeycomb yoke, so I'll just flick the switch on there. And we can now put the avionics on, so I'll flick the avionics switches, again, switch on my yoke, and you can see the MFD is coming on now. The screen is now, the engine displays have gone off the PFD now, and they're going to go over onto that side. There we go, so that's the equivalent of the display backup. Now, this doesn't actually work on the default equipment, but if you hit that, it would give you a PFD on both sides, and also engine instruments on both sides, which guards against one of these being knocked out in flight, essentially. Okay, so we'll get our flight instruments set up for departure. As you will know, if you've seen any of my other videos, I always set the ILS to check the nav equipment is working. We'll put it on box 1 and 2. And you can see the course display indicator there, so it should be giving us an ILS. It should actually auto-ident, so it should give us the ident on the back of that there. But I'll give it a second to work that one out. Com radios, it's all default Microsoft Flight Simulator, so if you've flown anything like the Bonanza or something in Microsoft Flight Simulator, all of this is going to be the same story in this aircraft. So com radios, I'm not going to bother setting the com radios up. Nav radios we've set there. ADF, let's set the Foxtrot November Yankee ADF. It's just 3, 3, So flight instruments checked and set. We've got altimeter 29902 set on the backup and the primary. Static air is closed. So that's pretty much all of that. Altimeter's reading what it should be. Turn coordinates is not showing anything. And everything looks normal. So we'll take the aircraft, we'll taxi it out, and we will... Hello. We'll line it up in a position to do some power checks, and I'll run through the normal sort of power check procedure that we do in the real aircraft. So I'll pop the taxi lights on, idle throttle, move the parking brake. Now, one thing you might notice with this aircraft, the panel is very, very high, and this is something which the last time I flew a Cessna 182 myself really kind of surprised me. The forward visibility is really quite poor on the ground. You almost feel like you need to sit on a cushion or something to see out. One great thing about Cessnas is they are really agile on the ground though, and this is no exception. So nice and easy to make a little spin around there using some of the differential braking. Excuse the dodgy taxi. The external sounds of this engine, really nice. Quite a sort of beefy 6-cylinder noise. A little bit less so inside, I'd say. Not quite as immersive on the inside as it is on the outside. Still pretty good though, you get lots of funny squeaks and things coming from the aircraft as you're taxiing around. Now there's not much wind around, but we will tilt the aircraft off the centerline axis of the taxiway, just so we're not blasting any aircraft behind us. I'm going to set 1200 RPM again. And we'll go into the before takeoff power checks. So fuel flow full forwards, fuel selector valve is on both, parking brake is set, pilot and passenger seat backs upright and locked, seats and seat belts are secure, cabin doors all secure, flight controls, that's just a full and free check, full forwards, full aft, full left, full right, and we can't see because I've had to move the viewpoint so far up. And this is something that's awkward about the real 182. Like I said, it's very tricky to see out of the side windows and out of the front at the same time. One of the great things about Cessnas is though you can check your tail empennage control surfaces by looking out the back window, which is a huge bonus for anyone who flies Pipers usually, because we aren't blessed with back windows. Altimeters, so 1013 or 29902 in this case, you can't actually change that on the default G1000, which is quite annoying. They've still not added that feature to allow you to use hectopascals. Altitude, so altcel, we're going to go up to 4,000 feet, so I'll assume that we've been cleared to that straight away. I'm going to turn the CDI bar. Tilt is very annoying because it's right in the way of the course indicator there. Thanks, Microsoft. Spin it all the way around, runway heading, which is 199, I believe. There we go. Heading, I'm going to drop that onto the same as well. Once we got there eventually, there we go. Still no signal from the ILS, which is strange. 11095 set. Let's see if we can get a audio ident off it. We hit nav 1 here. Anything? It's quite strange. Let's just set this up and put the DME on there. we can put a bearing on here, so we can put a bearing for the ADF, so that is pointing at the Foxtrot November Yankee. See if that idents. So is it a volume thing? 100% volume. Okay. So it sounds like can't ident anything. That's quite odd. I have done a few flights in this aircraft, and the radio nav equipment did seem to be working back then. We'll try it in the air and see what happens. But yeah, strange. No idents. So standby instruments. Yep. So we've got a attitude indicator, which check the orange bars are in the middle. Airspeed reading 0 as it should, and altimeter 29902 set, and reading within 50 feet of airfield elevation, which is 50 feet. Fuel quantities checked, so we're full of fuel. Fuel control, yeah, all set. So this is, there's an autopilot check to do. I'm not going to go through all that. It's the default, again, I believe it's a default Microsoft Flight Simulator autopilot, so there's not an awful lot to worry about with that. Now, this is another deviation from the real aircraft. These autopilot units are separate from the G1000 in terms of altimetry, so in fact that should actually work as well. When you press barrow, you put the you have to put the altimeter setting into this separately from your G1000 because it's not linked. But for some reason it's not working. On this one it's linked though, so if you change your altimeter setting on here, it will automatically feed it into here, which is not what the real aeroplane does, but I guess it makes things a little bit easier for flying it. Anyway, elevation and rudder trim controls, so we make sure that the trim is in the takeoff position there. That's your pitch trim. It's right there. And now we're on to our power check. So, cover the brakes, we check we're clear behind, we're not going to blow anyone away. We're going to go up to 1800 RPM, so here's our RPM gauge here. There's 1800. Doing a quick mag check, so we're going to check left mag, back to both, right mag, back to both, and it's a maximum of 175 RPM drop on those. I think we're well within limits. We're going to cycle the prop, so it just has to do one cycle here, so that's all we'll do. High to low, return to high, fully push in. So we're looking for fluctuation in oil pressure, increase in manifold pressure, decrease in RPM, and no oil over the top. So I'm going to hoik my seat back up again so I can actually see over the top. And we'll do this. So I'll do it again just in case you missed it. We've got a change in oil pressure, change in turbine inlet temperature, change in RPM, change in sound, but we didn't get any change in manifold air pressure, which is not what should be happening. Vacuum indicator, so I have no idea where that is on this aircraft, to be perfectly honest. I don't know if you've even got one. I suspect that the G1000 in the real aircraft would have a vacuum indicator, but I cannot see one anywhere on here, and there are no other engine pages that we can bring up in the real aircraft. There are engine system fuel pages that you can select down here. The default doesn't have the functionality for that, so potentially it's something that should be on the systems page, which we don't have access to. So unfortunately, shortcoming of the default instrumentation there. Ammeters and voltmeters, so we are, well, we've got a bus volts, that's all we've got. We don't have access to the ammeter. Again, I suspect the ammeter would be on the systems page. Don't have it, so not much we can do about that. And annunciations check, verify no alerts shown, which we're all clear on there. And then throttle control, we're going to check the idle. So we're going to bring the throttle all the way down to idle. Check that it idles nice and smoothly. And then we're going to bring the RPM back up to 1000. Throttle friction is fine. Comms we're not going to bother with. Navs are set, although they don't seem to be working for some reason. Flight plan, we've not put one in, but I'll put something in flight. We're just going to fly runway heading to start off with. If we had the OGS pages on the MFD, I could check GPS availability, but I can't. Transponder set, 7,000, we're on standby at the moment. And select the soft key for the CDI nav source, so we're going to take off on green needles because we don't have anything on the magenta right now. Wing flaps, so we can take off with anything from up to 20 degrees, but apparently according to the checklist 10 degrees is preferred. So we're going to set the flaps down. So this is that's a bit odd if you're doing it with your mouse. It doesn't actually do it to the pre-prescribed settings. I'm going to use it with the joystick button, so that's 10 degrees set there. Cowl flaps open, which they are. Cabin windows closed and locked. Yep, so the cabin windows do work. Pop them open and make lots of noise. There we are, closed and locked. And then it's basically just the line-up and the takeoff. So I'll put my checklist to one side now. We'll idle throttle, remove the parking brake. We'll assume we've got our clearance to take off. So we're going to taxi onto the runway. And we'll do our usual ATPL checks. That's approach path. Let me duck under the window here. Clear left, clear right. Transponder. So we'll go to the transponder page here. And on alts, although it should be automatic. Pitot heats. So the pitot heater goes on here. And the lights. Put all the lights. Again, buttons on my honeycomb yoke, and as I was concentrating on that, I've completely muffed the line up. As usual. Right, we'll get line back up again. T's and P's are green. No warning lights. We do actually have a glide slope and a localizer now, and it's identing, so it has woken up all of a sudden. So I'm going to add power. So we're going to use full power for takeoff. Prop full forward. Rotate at 60, and off we go. Very, very sensitive in pitch, this aeroplane, so if you notice it kind of shot off the runway a little bit. It required almost no input from me on the yoke to do that. Going back to what I remember about flying the 182, it's quite a heavy aeroplane in both pitch and roll. So not sure that that's quite accurate. We're going to climb at 80 knots. And you can see it's giving us around about 950 feet per minute rate of climb. 1,000 feet per minute now. So I will flash up the performance figures for the aircraft on screen now. So you see what kind of performance we should be achieving for this weight configuration and power setting, and it is around about 1,000 feet per minute, so that is perfect. However, we've got a stage of flaps out, so watch what happens when I put this stage of flap away. And off to space we go, so 1900, 1800s, 1750, 1700s, 1500s. So a good 500 feet per minute higher initially. We'll let it settle, give it a chance to sort itself out. Settling around about 1300, 1400 now. So I would say that is a bit much on the rate of climb. Let the aircraft accelerate a touch. Now we're going to accelerate to 90 knots, which is our en route climb speed. it takes us to get to 4,000 feet. We do actually have some book figures we can compare this to. And as you can see, we've got a clock down there in the corner, so I'm going to check this after the flight against the book figures. So max continuous in this aircraft is actually 32 inches and 2,400 RPM, so it's basically full power. So I'm just going to climb at full power. Coming up to 4,000 feet now. Very, very gently let the nose come down. Like I said, the pitch control is incredibly sensitive. Makes it very hard to fly this aeroplane smoothly. We'll leave it at full power for a sec. And I'm going to pull back to our cruise setting. Okay, so our sort of fast cruise setting is 28 inches and 2,400 RPM. So we don't touch the prop at all. And we bring the power back to 28 inches. And that should give us about 139 knots. So we'll see where that shakes out once we've got the aircraft trimmed. And that's true, that should be giving us. And as you can see, our TAS is actually down there, so that's the figure you need to be looking at. 149, 148 is what we're getting. That's a fair bit quicker, really, than what it should be doing at this altitude and with this power setting. Let's try another power setting, shall we? Okay, so I've had another look at the figures. Actually, for this altitude, 4,000 feet, we should be doing about 145 knots. So we're actually about 4 knots fast, which is well within limits. So that's fine, really. Book figures are always kind of estimated down a little bit to compensate for aircraft that aren't sort of box fresh. So another extra 4 knots is fine. So I'm going to go for a more economy cruise setting now. It's 28 inches and 2,100 RPM. So we're going to be flying over square. Or flying over square at the moment anyway, but that is quite normal for turbocharged aircraft. So I'm going to pull back the prop control now to 2,100 RPM. And I'm just doing that on my joystick, by the way, hence why you can't see me moving anything with the mouse. There's 2,100, there's 28 inches. This should be giving us 140 knots true. So if I can actually get the aircraft trimmed out, because it's so sensitive in pitch. As you can see, the speed is settling down now. We've got about 141, 140. So this is pretty much bang on book figures. So this is good. Now, according to the book figures, we should be getting about 14.1 gallons per hour for this power setting. And you see the gauge is split into blocks of 2, with 22 being the maximum. And we're about halfway. So actually, it's more like 11 gallons per hour that we're achieving right now, which is quite a lot better, really, than what it should be achieving. Bear in mind the fuel flow is still set full forwards here, so I've not tried to pull the fuel flow back at all, and it's doing far less than it really should be. Now, this is something which I find is a significant bit of immersion breaker in this aeroplane. It doesn't behave like a fuel-injected aircraft. It behaves as the default aircraft do, like a carburetted aircraft, which means that I have to lean this aeroplane out as I climb, which is not something you have to do on fuel-injected aircraft. You just set a fuel flow. So I'll tell you what we'll do. We will pull the mixture out, and we'll see what that does to the fuel flow and the power. So you see it is actually going down. We are actually losing a bit of power as I pull that out. Turbine inlet temperature is going down as well. So the peak turbine inlet temperature is about there. So you have to kind of lean this aeroplane out. Now, I don't know if they're going to fix that in the future, if that's a Microsoft thing that they can sort out, or a Carenado thing, to give this aircraft proper fuel-injected aircraft engine handling characteristics. But for now, the leaning procedure is aim for peak turbine inlet temperature here. So just keep, as you're climbing, keep pulling the mixture back, say every 1,000 feet or so, to maintain your climb performance. Otherwise, it's going to drop off dramatically as the air gets thinner, which isn't particularly realistic for what this the real aircraft would be doing. But unfortunately, that's the limitation that you've got in this thing. Anyway, that's enough about engine handling for now. Let's get into some general handling procedures, shall we? So we'll start off as we usually do with a clean stall. So 4,000 feet should be more than enough height. So height is sufficient, airframe is going to be a clean stall, so flaps up, gear is fixed. Safety and security, so yeah, nothing too heavy in the back of our virtual cabin. Doors shut, seatbelts latched. Engine T's and P's are good. I'm going to pop the fuel pump on as a bit of backup. It's unbelievably loud for some reason. Maybe it is in the real aeroplane, I don't know. T's and P's are all in the green. I'm going to shove the mixture, as I guess, as it is in this aeroplane, full forward again. And location and lookout, so we're not over any active airfields, built-up areas, controlled airspace, or danger zones. We do have a bit of a built-up area there, but we'll turn left a little bit to get away from that. Come around there. Now the aim of the game is going to be to recover the aircraft with minimum altitude loss. But we are going to make sure the aircraft fully stalls, so we can see what the stall characteristics should be. Now the 182 is quite a benign aeroplane. Like I said, it's quite heavy on the controls, but it's very stable. I do believe you can get it to wing drop with flap and power on stalls and things like that if you abuse it quite a bit, but the standard stall characteristics for the 182 should just be kind of a mushy, wobbly drop out of the sky, essentially, kind of like the Arrow is. So that's what we're looking for. So I'm gonna, well, I'm gonna duck my head down. This is a Cessna thing, by the way, so before we're gonna do a little bit of a clearing turn to the left, so you gotta look under the wing like that before you turn, looking for any traffic. I'm just gonna turn a little bit, reset our heading bug, and then we're gonna go straight to the maneuvers. I'm gonna pull the power all the way back, push the prop full forwards, and just pitch to maintain altitude. I'm gonna use a little bit of trim to help, but not too much, because that's gonna hinder the recovery. And try and keep everything as neutral as possible as the aircraft slows down. Try to maintain altitude. I'm expecting the aircraft to stall at a very high nose attitude, somewhere around 50 knots in this weight configuration at this altitude. As you can see, nose is coming up very high, which is a Cessna thing. There's the stall warner. Losing quite a lot of altitude here. I'm struggling to maintain it. And we're buffeting, and yeah, we kind of dropped the wing a little bit. Okay, fair enough. Top us upside down, why don't you? Right, so while I try to recover the aircraft and make sure we don't die. So that was partial, verging on a full spin there to the left, which is odd in an aircraft with a right turning propeller. If it's going to drop a wing, it's usually the right one. So, as you can see, stall characteristics initially fairly benign, but if you hold it in the stall for a couple of seconds, it tries to murder you. So, interesting one there. Interestingly similar to the stall characteristics of the Carenado Seminole when I tested that aeroplane. Okay, so let's try just to remove the possibility from the equation. Let's try a stall with full flaps. So airframe, height sufficient airframe, below 100 knots, flaps down to full, in stages, indicator travelling. Let's add some power so we don't stall straight off the bat. Safety security, yeah, engine T's and P's good, pump is on. Location lookout, yeah, we'll assume that that's all good, and we'll just go straight into the manoeuvre. So this is a full flat stall. So you'd expect the aircraft to stall at a lower airspeed, at a lower nose attitude. Lower airspeed certainly, and yeah, there she goes again. So I'll avoid the aerobatics. And positive rate of climb, flaps up. That's travelling. Right, so yeah, the stall characteristics of this aeroplane are a bit not what I would expect from a high-wing Cessna. High-wing Cessnas generally very stable little aeroplanes. Like I said, you can get them to drop wing, especially the 152. The 152 can be a little bit hairy at times. You can actually full spin the 152. The 172 and the 182, certainly 182, I don't actually know that much about the 172, but certainly the 182 is not cleared for deliberate spins. There is a spin recovery technique in the POH, but it is just in case you get into one accidentally. It's not the sort of aeroplane you can practice these sorts of things in. Anyway, let's do something else, shall we? Okay, so we're now set up at 25 inches manifold pressure, 2100 RPM, which is a nice sort of economy cruise configuration. It's giving us 125 indicated, 131 true, and we're going to do some steep turns. So we're going to go all the way around, back onto heading of south, 180 here, and we're going to go to the left all the way around, and I'm going to try to maintain altitude and airspeed. So bank, balance, back pressure, there we go. We'll go for about 45 degrees, we'll not go too crazy. I'm having to put very, very little back pressure in here. I'm going to bump the power up to 28 inches just so we maintain airspeed as best we can. Very, very little back pressure required. Bit of buffet. I would certainly expect to be having to put more effort on the yoke than I am. I'm basically just tickling it with my fingers in a definitely not lewd way. And I'm going to kick out of it with a fair bit of opposite rudder here. Okay, so that was surprisingly easy. I would certainly expect to have to put a little bit more effort on the controls to maintain altitude in a steep turn in a real 182. Like I said, they're quite heavy in pitch, whereas this aeroplane seems to have Spitfire controls, but just in the pitch axis. So, sorry. So, yeah, maybe a little bit off there. Okay, so we're back to 2100, so that should give us a more sort of fast cruise setting. And I'm going to try the autopilot out. So this should be no surprise because it is a default flight simulator autopilot. So let's pop it into heading and alt. No, 4,000 feet, please. And then we'll just hit autopilot, a little bit of a jerk. And then it settles down. So this autopilot is pretty competent, controls in both pitch and roll, much more effective than the autopilot in the Just Flight Arrow, but that's because the autopilot in the Just Flight Arrow is representative of the real Arrow default autopilot, which is rubbish. So those of you who like flying on the autopilot, this aeroplane is much better for you guys. Because it is a much better autopilot. It even has an approach linked function, so it will fly you down the approach, which is, I guess, nice. If you want an autopilot will do that. I'm just going to lean out a little bit and give us peak turbine inlet temperature again. There we go. Okay, so aircraft's now flying quite comfortably on autopilot, and I'm going to pop a route in to take us to Nottingham. So again, this is all default Microsoft Flight Simulator. Any of you who have flown the default aeroplanes know how this all works. Nottingham, enter, enter. Hey, the enter thing works these days. Right, so we can now switch our CDI to magenta and hit nav mode, and it should keep us on there. Now, as you can see, we're quite close to Nottingham right now, so it's not going to be a particularly long leg. In fact, it's going to be a mile. But I just wanted to show you how the setup works, and that the autopilot does very competently follow nav, and it does follow the ILS as well. There's City of Nottingham on the side of us there. So we've sort of blundered around a bit here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull the aircraft back out to a reasonable sort of distance and descend a little bit. and then I'll join you back again for the join-in for some circuits. Right, so just something I wanted to show you as I start the descent. I'm going to keep using the autopilot here. We're in heading mode. We're just flying back away from Nottingham a little bit. Is how the descent works in this airplane. Now, how this works in the real plane, I know because this exact unit is fitted to quite a few of our aircraft in our flying school, is that you select your lower altitude. In fact, you'd select it on here as well, and you go into, so you hit alt, which puts you into VS mode. Now, what you should be seeing on here is the VS annunciation, and then a selector here which shows 0 feet, which you can then select up or down on these buttons here, and select a rate of descent in feet per minute. Now, for whatever reason, it doesn't show you on here what you got selected, so I can click this a bunch of times, and as you can see, the aircraft is starting to descend now. So I'm going to pull the power back at a sort of steady 250 feet per minute, 300 feet per minute, and we've got no indications of what our rate of descent is actually set to, which is very awkward, really. So I was praising the autopilot a second ago, but this aspect is definitely not great. Now, from what I remember, the default aircraft, the VS mode does work. I may be mistaken, I'm going to have to go and check. But this certainly is a bit of a downside of this aircraft. Really. As you can see, it's managing the descent quite nicely. It's just that I can't tell what I've got set in terms of the target vertical speed, which is annoying. Okay, so here we go then. We are just about to cross the National Water Sports Centre here for our usual circuits from 827 at Nottingham. I've set the altitude target to 2,000 feet on here and here. So normally in the real aeroplane, it would capture this altitude. So it would come out of VS mode and go back into alt hold. In this aeroplane, nah, it's going to take you all the way into the ground, so you have to actually click it back onto altitude hold mode there when you reach your target altitude, which is not ideal. So that's one more little downside that we've got there. Anyway, we'll do our pre-joining check, so that's fuel is on and sufficient. Fuel pump we leave off, I believe, in the 180. You don't have to actually put it on in the circuit. But we can check our fuel quantity is still almost full. We've used barely anything. Radio, so we set the comms radios up and nav radios as required. Mixture full rich. Altimeter set airfield QNH, which is 29992. And DI aligned, and we can see the DI is behaving itself, so that's fine. I'm going to set us up for a bit of a standard overhead join at Nottingham. So I'm just going to do a dead side. Well, I can still do a dead side. Let's crank it down. One of the great things about Cessnas is they are quite draggy. So you do need to... Well, I say that, but I'm struggling a little bit here. Surprisingly slippy, actually. One of the things you'd usually notice about a high-wing Cessna if you were flying it in real life is pull the power back. I suppose I could shove the prop forward for a bit of extra drag, but actually my prop control isn't working at this airspeed for some reason. It's a little bit strange. You would expect the prop to still be working, still at 120 knots. Anyway, busted through my target altitude. I was aiming for 950. Set the prop back to 2100. And we'll aim for about 100 knots, so about 18 inches of manifold pressure should get us there. See the airfield down there. One of the great things about Cessnas is it gives you a great view below, so it's very good for keeping track of the airfield. And I'll try not to smash us into the ground. Horrible altitude keeping. Let's set this down at 900 feet now. So at least we've got a bug to aim at. Set the course. Let's go the other way. Trying to do far too many things at once. Horrible airmanship here. Obviously, I'm only doing it as an example to you guys, so you don't do it yourselves. Right. Onto downwind now, so we'd make our radio call and we'll do our pre-landing check. So brakes pressurised, undercarriage is down and fixed. Mixture full rich. Mags are on both. Speed check below 140, flaps 1. Instruments are all in the green. Carpeet we don't have. Alternates air we don't have, but we do have our cowl flaps, so we'll pop those open. Hatches and harnesses secure, and the lights, landing and taxi, both go on. So we can get our first stage of flaps out below 140, our second stage below 120, and our third stage below 100, I believe. Yeah, there we go. If you forget, it's actually on the flap indicator itself. So let's turn just before we get to Cockgrave here. And speed below 120, flaps 2. Add a little bit of power to compensate. We are a touch low. Good view of the runway though. From here, aiming for about 600 feet on the base to final turn, so we will come down a touch. Final approach speed in this aircraft is about 70 knots, full flap. Start our turn base to final now. Power back a touch. Start to bring the speed back towards 70. We'll go full flap now, below 100, flaps 3. Reds, blues, greens, no reds. Well, reds, yeah, so red is full forwards. Blue levers full forwards. No greens, I meant to say. There's 70 knots, so don't bust through that. Again, quite tricky to hold at the right attitude just because of how sensitive this aircraft is in pitch. Aiming for the numbers. Keep the power on fairly late because Cessnas do tend to drop out of the sky, certainly in full flat landings. And down we go. Full power. Flaps are travelling and we're up. Okay, so we're back, just turning from crosswind onto downwind now. So this time around we're going to do a flapless approach. And we'll approach at 75 knots this time. So brakes pressurised, undercarriage fixed, mixtures full rich. Fuel is on as sufficient, flaps not required. Instruments are all in the green, carpeet we don't have. Cowl flaps are open, hatches and harnesses secure, and the lights are on. Let's have a look at our airfield, looking good. Turn just before Cockgrave. Touch fast. Don't really want to be 120 knots in the circuit, that is a bit much. And I'm going to start pulling the power back here. I'm going to slow the aircraft down to more like sort of 85, and then I'm going to let the aircraft descend. So slow down before I go down. Surprisingly, it takes quite a surprisingly long time to slow this aircraft down without flap, which is not really what I would expect. Like I said, high-wing Cessna generally quite a draggy aeroplane. Anyway, speed's looking okay now, height's looking okay. Let's make our turn. There's our centre line. So reds, blues, greens, reds full forward, blues full forward, no greens to look at. And I'm struggling to get the speed down here. We're stuck up at about 90 knots, which is about 20 knots faster than I'd really want. 100 knots faster than I'd really want. So, given this is not a particularly long runway, this is looking to me like a go-around. But we'll get into the friction layer. It's probably going to float. It's floating. It's floating. There we go, there's the wheels touched. And given that it's a touch and go anyway, I will take it. But not ideal. Now you could probably say I'm a rubbish pilot and I just mucked it up, and I guess I kind of did, but I was expecting the aircraft to have a lot more drag than it did in that configuration as the real aircraft does. So that's my excuse. Let's get back to this sort of configuration. Now you will note that I'm taking a really tight line this time around because we're going for our glide approach to land. So let's see how this one works out. Normally you'd expect very steep approach angle for a glide approach for a Cessna, but we'll see what happens. So there's our runway looking good. So let's do our checks. Brakes, pressurised, undercarriage is fixed, mixture's full rich, mags are on both, fuel on sufficient, flaps not required or deferred, instruments are on the green, carpet you don't have, cowl flaps are open, hatches and harness are secure, lights are on, and I'm going to go from here. I'm going to turn straight for the runway. So straight away I'm going to get the aircraft slowed down to 70 as we turn and get it trimmed in and set. 70 is our best glide speed. And I suspect that I'm going to be struggling here, so I'm going to start putting flap out now. There's flaps 1, below 140, below 120 flaps 2, and below 100 flaps 3. Let's get it all out. Still got a bit of a turn to do. Now with the flap out, the airplane is quite draggy, so that's looking quite good. Let's do a bit of a slit. Okay, that's looking better. Reds, blues, greens. Shove that blue lever forwards. Try and pick the centre line back up. Round it out and be prepared to touch down fairly hard. Cessna with full flat landing. And there we go. Nice gentle braking. I'll hoik my seat up so I can see where I'm going. Okay, runway vacated. Set parking brake and strobes, landing lights. Fuel pump is off. Transponder should go to standby. And flaps up. And let's go park up and then we'll talk about the aeroplane. Okay, so here we are parked up on the ground at Nottingham with all our chocks and cones and all the other accoutrements attached back to the aeroplane. And I'm going to go over the sort of positives and negatives that I picked up from spending a couple of days and a few hours flying around in this thing, and try to come to a conclusion as to whether this thing is worth the price. So we'll start off with the positives. The major positive with this aircraft, I would say, is the quality of the interior and the exterior models. They are incredibly good. Assuming you're into that sort of brand new shiny box fresh look. If you want something that's a little bit more weathered, then you maybe don't think it's as quite as good as I do, but I think this looks very, very smart. I think it looks fantastic. At least as good as the default aircraft, and we all know the default aircraft look absolutely fantastic in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So I would give them a big thumbs up for the quality of the interior modelling and the exterior modelling. Just have a quick look at the interior again. Very, very nice, lovely textures. 10 out of 10, lovely. With the slight proviso that those red screens are present. You can see them there, look. So with the screens off, you get the red Satan screens. So a little bit of a bug there that they could probably sort out fairly easily. The next positive I've got, I'd say the sounds are good, but I'm going to preface that with saying the exterior sounds are good. I'm not a huge fan of the interior sounds of this aeroplane. They don't really sound that much like the real thing, in my opinion. Bear in mind, it's been quite a long time since I last flew a Cessna 182. It's probably at least a couple of years, maybe even longer. Can't quite remember. I should probably dig my logbook out and find out. But it's been quite a while since I last flew one, and it wasn't a turbo 182 either. It was a regular, normally aspirated one. But that said, I just don't think it gives that sort of sense of being sat in a real airplane, which some of the other Microsoft Flight Simulator add-ons right now do, because the sound system in this simulator is incredibly good. And when you sort of use it properly, then you can come away with some really great effects. Some of the sounds as well, the squeaky sort of taxi noises, I think they're just defaults, or they're ported over from other Carenado aircraft. I certainly have heard those sound effects before, so they aren't sort of custom and recorded from the real airplane, as are the Just Flight Piper Arrow, which everything is sort of recorded from the real thing. Something else I've got down here as a positive, it's got quite accurate cruise performance. So set the aircraft up with the right prop and throttle setting at the right altitude, and they've actually provided cruise performance tables in the aircraft documentation if you go into the route folder, and you can check that for yourself. They are pretty accurate. I used a real aircraft POH for mine, for this test here, and it did seem to correspond quite nicely. I've also been up to about sort of 15,000 feet in this thing and checked that it does still all work at that sort of altitude, and it does, and it's still on the book figures, and the manifold pressure maintains as it should do in a turbocharged aeroplane. So yeah, thumbs up for the cruise performance. It is pretty damn accurate. I would also say cruise performance is very helpful for those of you who want to fly at high altitude over obstacles. So say you want an airplane that can do across country, across the Alps or something like that, or across the Rockies, or you want to operate out of hot and high strips in the Rockies or in South America or anywhere in the world, really, Himalayas, I guess. This is the light aircraft for you because that turbocharger is a real advantage. That said, you know, the default DA62 is turbocharged as well, so you can get some good performance out of that at high altitude as well. I've also put down the price is cheaper than most other GA add-ons for Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's £24, I believe, in the store in the UK, and that equates to about sort of $33, $34 for those of you in the US. So it's not massively expensive, which I would say is a bit of a positive if you're looking to expand your Microsoft Flight Simulator hangar without spending all the money in the world, I guess. Right, okay, so negatives now. Now the first one I've got here is the fact that there is no checklist with this airplane. So as you are probably familiar with, Microsoft Flight Simulator has a really great in-cockpit checklist system, which some add-on aircraft incorporate. This one, however, does not. So you've got no checklist. Also, there is no checklist included in the documentation either. So the only way to get a proper checklist for this aeroplane is to go online and Google one. And I've not really been able to find one. There are checklists for the 182T, the non-turbocharged aircraft, available in PDF format from various sources. But the T182T, sorry, the turbo Skylane, I've not been able to find one. So unless you've got one hanging around in real life, or you're willing to buy one, you're going to have to leaf through the POH and use the checklist that's included in the POH, because there are POHs online for this aircraft, pilots operating handbooks, which is a bit awkward, and certainly not great for those of you who don't have real-world flying experience and you're not sort of familiar with where to find those sorts of things. So I guess that's certainly a negative point in that aspect. One more note on the documentation which is included with the aircraft. They have included emergency procedure checklists for some reason. They've included cruise performance tables, but they haven't included climb performance tables or takeoff performance or anything like that, and we'll get onto that in a little bit. I've noticed there's some limited functionality with the aircraft. So if I pop the yoke away, for example, this aircraft has a heated prop, which is quite clever for a light aircraft and probably quite important for one that spends a lot of its time at high altitude. However, it doesn't work. Obviously, things like the circuit breakers don't work. The alternate static does, and the standby battery and that kind of stuff, which is nice. And also the ELT, you can turn that on. It makes lots of bleeping noises, and you've got a Hobbs meter here, so you can see how long you've been flying for. But not everything in this cockpit works. Not everything with the G1000 works either. You don't have synthetic vision and airport diagrams and that sort of stuff that you do get with the default aircraft, which also use the G1000. So I'm not really sure why the G1000 in this aircraft has less functionality than the default aircraft. It's a little bit strange. Next one I've got here is the mixture issue that I was talking about in flight. So for me, that's a real immersion breaker. It's a fuel-injected aircraft. You shouldn't have to sort of lean it out to get best performance out of it. Fuel-injected aircraft, you can basically climb up as high as you want with the red lever forward, and the airflow sensors, or the fuel metering unit, shall we say, of the aircraft will automatically pull the mixture back to keep it within a range that will keep it operating, and then obviously you can fine-tune it then with the red lever once you're in the cruise. It's something that affects the default Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft, and maybe you can forgive it on the default aircraft. Honestly, I can't really. I think it's a bit silly and it needs sorting, but on an aircraft that you've paid for, you'd have thought that they would have put the time in to make sure it works properly in that respect. It might be limitations with the sim. Maybe when they sort it out with the default aircraft in the sim, then this aircraft will be fixed as well. But for now, it's a big sort of downside to this airplane, for me personally. So the next thing I've got on here is the fact that it does just use default avionics. There's nothing custom in here, so you don't get any extended functionality compared to the other aircraft. Now there is a default Microsoft Flight Simulator 172 with a G1000 fitted to it, and most of you who are just after a Cessna with a G1000 fit probably won't see the value in this aeroplane because, yeah, okay, it's a slightly bigger 172. What's the point? So it does kind of narrow the market of this thing. If they had gone all in and done custom avionics and everything, then it would certainly make more sense to those of you buying this aeroplane. But yeah, it's a little bit disappointing. It's not enormously surprising, given the price of this aeroplane. But yeah, a bit of a downside, I would certainly say. The Autopilot as well is you will see this Autopilot fit in the default 172 without the G1000 if you have that, because I do think it's one of those aeroplanes that you have to get one of the like upgraded versions of the sim to see. So that this is a default asset as well. So yeah, no custom avionics is a bit of a downside. Next item I have got the climb performance of the aeroplane. So I've been back and I've looked at the time it took us to climb from the surface of the runway up to 4,000 feet. Now bear in mind, I wasn't flying as accurately as perhaps I should have been doing. I left the flaps out for a little bit longer than I really should have done, just so I could show you the difference in performance when you pull the flaps up. And also I allowed the aircraft to accelerate a little bit towards the end of the climb into more of a cruise climb than a VY climb. However, it should have taken us 4 minutes at that power setting to reach 4,000 feet at those atmospheric settings in that weight configuration. It took us 3 minutes, pretty much to the second. So it's a third faster than it really should have been, while I was doing lots of stuff which also dampened the climb performance. So I suspect if I'd have climbed that aircraft as hard as I could, as accurately as I could probably knock another 30 seconds or so off of that climb time. So it just shows how much more effective the climb is in this aircraft than it really should have been. Which is a downside for those of you who like to have their aircraft as close to the real-world book figures as possible. I suspect that's probably why they didn't include the climb graphs in the documentation that they supply with this aircraft, because it just allows you to have a look and measure it up against those climb performance graphs and find out that actually it's not all that realistic. I've also put down in terms of the handling characteristics of the aeroplane. I said in flight the pitch is sensitive. It is. The pitch is very, very sensitive, overly sensitive as far as I'm concerned. Like I said, it's been a while since I last flew a 182, but I remember it being a heavy aeroplane, which required quite a bit of effort on the yoke to get it to pitch up and down. Certainly in the cruise. This aeroplane, unbelievably sensitive, almost like a Spitfire or something. The tiniest bit of control deflection will get you a huge change in attitude, which I don't think is particularly realistic. Also, the rate of roll can be perhaps a little high as well. It's just a little bit overly agile. I mean, it's not a sluggish aeroplane in real life by any means, but I certainly think it should feel a bit heavier. And that's something that I think that the Just Flight Arrow, for example, portrays excellently. I think it really gives you the feeling of the aeroplane in real life, given that it's a little bit sort of heavy, a little bit agricultural feeling. This aeroplane, it kind of feels like, I don't know, like an X-Wing or something. It just instantly responds to the controls, which is, I don't know, just a little bit immersion breaking for me. I would also say that the aircraft is lacking in drag a little bit. It really doesn't slow down all that well if the flaps aren't out. Now you saw on the glide approach that I did that we were really struggling to get the aeroplanes in the right speed window for the approach. We were about sort of 20 knots faster than I would usually be approaching at, which is way too high. I certainly wouldn't have been able to land from that approach, given that I just sort of touched the wheels and set the power back up. It was okay, it worked, even though it was kind of at the midpoint. But if we were trying to land off that would have been a go-around. Now you could just say, you know, I'm a rubbish pilot, and I should have managed my speed better. But I did really try to manage the speed properly. I tried to get the speed down in advance before we started descending, because slowing down and going down at the same time is not something you can always do in every aeroplane. And even then, we weren't able to get it under control and the height under control at the same time. So yeah, you could say, you know, I'm just rubbish and I should have slowed down earlier. But I think it is lacking in a bit of drag. That it should really be a much draggier airframe. I mean, you've got to remember, you've got these massive, I mean, they are fed in, but you do have these massive fixed landing gears sticking out the bottom of the aeroplane. You've got this massive strut here. The wing is quite sort of thick. So this isn't an aeroplane that's built for speed. This is a plane that sort of has quite a lot of drag, and something that should slow down relatively easily. Anyway, the last thing I've got on here, and this could be a big one for you, depending on whether you go out and you general handle with your aeroplanes or not, is the stall characteristics of the aeroplane. That sort of left wing drop and the partial spin. If you've seen my video on the Carenado Seminole, it does something almost identical. Now, I don't know if this is something that Carenado just bake into all their airplanes because they think, well, you know, when airplanes stall, this can sometimes happen. But I really think that they should look at the real stall characteristics of the real aeroplane before they sort of set the aeroplane up to do these sorts of things, because I'm absolutely certain that it would take a lot of abuse to put this aeroplane, or to make this aeroplane do something like that. If you were maybe, you know, full flap, full power, stalling the aircraft, very high nose attitude with full flap, then yeah, sure, you know, it might sort of drop a wing and try to spin you around. But in a clean config, it should really just mush along nice and stable, just like the Arrow does, the Just Flight Arrow, again referencing back to that aeroplane. But I do really think that aeroplane does a fantastic job of representing the real thing in all sort of aspects of all stages of flight, including the stall. So they could probably do with tweaking the flight model a little bit to make it a little bit more accurate. Right, so that's the positives and negatives of this aeroplane. So do I think it's worth it? I think, for me personally, bear in mind, again, you know, I'm a pilot in real life. This is my job, my full-time job. If I fly flight sim, I want it to be as close to real life as possible. Otherwise, it just feels like I'm playing, you know, a video game. It makes me feel like I'm playing GTA 5 or something, not a flight simulator. So, for me, this aircraft doesn't make an awful lot of sense. It's not... It kind of destroys the immersion of flying in a flight simulator. You can't sort of imagine you're in the real thing. If you're knowledgeable of the real thing, you're flying an aircraft like this, it very quickly sort of takes your head out of the immersion box, I guess, for want of a better word. However, if you are a big fan of the Cessna 182, if you really wanted to fly one in Microsoft Flight Simulator, then this is your only option right now. So it might certainly be worth it for you. Why is there a baggage loader at Nottingham? What? Anyway, it's got to be unloading all of those commercial flights that come in and out of Nottingham with its 1 kilometre runway. Anyway, So, for me, I wouldn't say I would willingly pay £23 for this aeroplane. But like I said, if you're really into the 182, then maybe £23 sounds like a good shout, a good deal for you. Also, if you're not that interested in super accurate performance, and you want an aircraft that's good at high altitudes and good in hot and high takeoff situations, flying over the Alps, that kind of thing, like I said, this perhaps is a great option for you. It does look great. The sounds are great from the outside anyway. So, you know, bit of eye candy, good performance at high altitude. That might be the aeroplane for you. But just from my point of view, as somebody who would always go for maximum realism if I was going to spend money on an aircraft in any flight simulator, this isn't really what I would go for. And that's really the situation why I haven't. I didn't buy this aeroplane when it came out, is because it didn't look like that sort of study level plane that I enjoy flying in flight simulators. That said, another massive thank you to Carenado. I've just been slagging their product off for the last 5 minutes. But yeah, massive thank you for giving us access to this aeroplane. Hopefully they're not going to say, yeah, we don't want to give you any more based on this review. Because I really hope they do, because it's a massive help to us. I am a penniless flying instructor. I don't have an awful lot of money to be spending on add-ons to review for you guys. So they went out on a bit of a limb to give us this aeroplane, because we are still quite a small channel, just very close to 1,000 subs. But given, you know, in comparison to how big some other flight simulation channels are, I'm very grateful that they saw it fit to give us access to this for free. So yeah, massive thank you for that. Hopefully I'll have something else for you soon. Maybe it's going to be Carenado, maybe not. But yeah, thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed, yeah, thumbs up, like, and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. And I will see you next time.